An assassin, sent from the future, must travel into the past to find the target. Those who sent this being feared that an actor, now turned politician, would be disastrous for the future. So to stop that, they'll undermine his film career by killing the man behind the film that made him into an acceptable mainstream actor to the American public. The assassin infects the brains behind that project with a virus while he's at work in Italy, but rather than killing him, the virus makes him feverish, giving him a vision that serves as the inspiration for the very film they wish to avert ever being made. Time travel once again causes the very event it wishes to prevent. Yes, the Terminator began its existence as a fever dream in the mind of James Cameron, who had just been removed from his first director gig on the low-budget crap fest Piranha 2. Cameron is one of many who had come up through the Roger Corman method of filmmaking, working in the man's miniature studio to help crank out cheap effects. Yes, cheap and Corman go together like France and the French. They're inseparable, and this experience did rub off on Cameron in that he learned how to make films quickly and efficiently. However, Corman and Cameron could not have been more different. Corman wanted to get a film done quickly and cheaply and would sacrifice quality to get it done. Not so Cameron, who was a perfectionist and highly demanding, earning much ire from those who worked with him over the years, but rarely was the result not worth it. Aliens, The Abyss, Terminator 2, True Lies, Titanic, Avatar, and not a box office flop amongst them. But all that laid in the future, a future that might never be given the disaster Piranha 2 was proving. Cameron was brought in as a replacement director on that film, but in retrospect it was clear why. Per the contract, the film could not have an Italian listed as the director. So he did what he could while being squeezed out by the producer, and Cameron wound up with his name left on as the film's director despite his best efforts to get it removed because he'd hardly done anything on the film and he wasn't too happy with the way things were going. While working on getting that done, Cameron was stricken ill and in a fever dream witnessed a mechanical skeleton coming out of flames. An image he found so powerful he drew it to preserve the image, and that was the seed from which the Terminator would grow. On returning to America, Cameron would approach his future wife and future ex-wife, Gail Ann Hurd, to try to turn these concepts into something. The two had met while working for Corman's New World Pictures. Yes, the same New World that would bring us Godzilla 1985 and would buy Marvel Comics by accident. Cameron's hope was to create a script that would wow a studio enough to get them to want to back it, but also be inexpensive enough that he could insist on being the one to direct it. So while the two knew the mechanical thing belonged to the future, it would be less expensive to shoot the majority of the film in the present. Hence, time travel. And from that, the film started to come together. Part of the inspiration came from 2 episodes of The Outer Limits, Soldier and Demon with a Glass Hand, both by Harlan Ellison. There was also an agreement between Cameron and Hurd on having a strong female lead, rising from normalcy into heroism over the course of the film. In order to get the wheels in motion, Cameron sold the script idea to Hurd for $1. It was getting the $6 or so million more that was going to prove the problem, though. Not only was Cameron a first-time director, but his name was still attached to Piranha 2, so it was either he has no experience or here's his experience and it's shit. But former Roger Corman staffers Barbara Boyle and Francis Dole were now at Orion, and they quickly fell in love with the idea. It was an action film, but it was more than an action film. Those two quickly became a strong force within Orion to get the film made. So finally, Orion chief Mike Medavoy agreed to finance it, with Cameron as director, but there was a condition. He wanted some star names to serve as a safety net here. Arnold Schwarzenegger had headlined 2 films, Hercules in New York and Conan the Barbarian. But in the former he had been dubbed, and in the latter, well, he's a barbarian. Schwarzenegger wanted to move his career forward with more mainstream pictures, so he was suggested to play Kyle Reese, the Human. The Terminator itself, well, Medavoy had someone different in mind for that. He was thinking more of O.J. Simpson. Cameron had a bit of a problem with both those choices. Schwarzenegger seemed all wrong for this kind of film. And not to mention, it was rather unbelievable that in a starving future, he'd look like he rode out the apocalypse in a GNC filled with weightlifting equipment. And O.J.? Well, let's be honest. This is the early 80s. Doing a movie about a black guy hunting down a white chick was going to have a lot of racial baggage to it that this film really didn't need. Plus, Cameron felt that O.J. just didn't look like a killer. And hell, I know there's at least 12 people who agreed with him. Cameron went to meet with Schwarzenegger, expecting to find him an impossible fit for the role, even going so far as to say to his roommate on the way out, "Do I owe you any money? Because I have to go pick a fight with Conan." But very quickly it was obvious that Schwarzenegger knew what the role required and had the look to him. The only thing missing was a desire to play the villain. At the time it seemed like a step backwards, going from the leading man to the villain, and not only a villain, one that doesn't even appear in the final acts of the film. And he only had 17 lines in the entirety of the film. And what's more, Cameron had already cast Lance Henriksen, the two had worked together on Piranha 2, as the Terminator, in part for his help in getting the financial backing for the film. Henriksen was to play the Terminator as the ultimate infiltrator, to blend into the crowd and yet be a predator amidst the prey. But now Cameron was seeing Schwarzenegger as an unstoppable machine, and suddenly he found himself going from finding a way to get rid of him to pleading with him to take the part. The Terminator was the title role, he pointed out, and the audience will see you as a villain, sure, but an awesome villain in the colloquial and literal sense of the word. It's amazing in retrospect to see how much persuading was required to get Schwarzenegger to take the role that would propel his career to the top and help define his public persona. But this was before all of that, so Michael Biehn, who was cast as Kyle, and Linda Hamilton, who was cast as Sarah Connor, the female lead, suddenly found themselves in a Schwarzenegger film, leading to snickers from friends and uncertainty as to the fate of this project. What's more, Dino De Laurentiis activated a clause in Schwarzenegger's contract that meant he couldn't work on anything besides Conan for a 9-month period, delaying the film into 1984. Cameron would use this time to work on the script for a film he was hired to write but not to direct, Rambo: First Blood Part 2. With the actors in place, the next big issue was special effects. Cameron himself had experience with this and knew how to do most of it, but to pull off everything, they were pointed to Stan Winston. Stan Winston Studios had been running for more than a decade by then, handling everything from the Wookiee costumes in the Star Wars Holiday Special to some of the work on John Carpenter's The Thing, and had numerous nominations and awards for his work. But they were still small enough to work with Cameron on this film, and like so many, the success of the Terminator would increase the notoriety of Stan Winston Studios. But there were problems. A misunderstanding led to the full-size Terminator being made of steel and was too heavy to move. A problem because they were shooting this thing on a shoestring budget, which meant night shoots and oftentimes no permits, as guerrilla filmmaking often did. So it was frequently action, cut, print, now everyone run before the cops show up. So you can imagine the difficulty of trying to be incredibly mobile while you've got a prop that requires 4 people to move it. They did in fact get nailed by the cops once during the final shot of the film, but Cameron did the honorable thing. He told a massive lie that they were film students who didn't know any better, and they got away with it. With the cops anyway. The studio was another matter. When they saw the film, the Orion execs were convinced it was just a lowbrow exploitation picture like you'd expect from the director of Piranha 2. Orion gave the film next to nothing in the way of advertising or publicity, earning such outrage that Michael Biehn's agent, who represented a number of name actors, called up Orion saying that he found this whole thing shameful and he was in fact considering keeping his talent away from Orion if they didn't believe in his clients and their films. And they should have. Many agree that with proper promotion, the Terminator would have been a $100 million film. But despite that, it was still a success, with rave reviews, substantial sales, and was the second most popular video of the year when released. But after that success was when Cameron had to pay for his comment. Those 2 episodes of The Outer Limits had been written by the famous and famously litigious Harlan Ellison, who saw those as well as his work I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream in The Terminator. He sued Orion for plagiarism, and they were prepared to fight it, except there was testimony from someone on set saying that Cameron had joked about ripping off a couple Outer Limits episodes. Both episodes are great, don't get me wrong, but even mashed together, the similarities between the stories and the Terminators is thin to say the least. And Cameron was probably allowing sleep deprivation and exhaustion to just make an off-the-cuff exaggeration. There's little doubt that they helped to inspire this, certainly, but by no means was it plagiarized. But with this testimony, Orion wasn't so certain that they could win a case, and so much to Cameron's annoyance, they paid off Ellison and added an acknowledgement to him in the credits of the film. And of course, the film would go on to spawn 4 sequels with more planned, a television series, and numerous tie-ins. And it gave James Cameron the chance to direct bigger budgets until the former guerrilla filmmaker would be known for going over inflated budgets. Gale Anne Hurd would help bring tons of successful genre films to the screen as varied as Aliens, Tremors, and The Walking Dead, to name but a few. And Schwarzenegger went from a guy studios didn't want to cast because of his accent to being so mainstream he became governor of California. So let's take a look at the film itself and see the humble origins of this juggernaut.